no prospects for doing anything significant about it. That's the trouble. And especially true in this country, because we've got a media which is way more interested in telling us about the deaths of the likes of Chandra Levy, Nicole Brown Simpson, and Michael Jackson than it is in telling us anything about what we can expect down the road in our personal situations as they are affected by big events of the kind I've just rattled off here. So it's a society in denial, it's a society that's asleep, and you're going to have the righties blaming the lefties insofar as anything goes wrong, and you'll have the lefties blaming the righties, and on it goes, but nobody wants to face what's really happening, which is a broadly crumbling system with a whole bunch of blame to go around. All right, but no, it's all business as usual, as if business as usual can continue on forever. Well, folks, it can't. And so one of the things I've been doing this summer is summering up, starting with stuff like this.
Why not? Why can't it go on?
Because we're running out of gas, for starters.
No, we're not.
Oh, the hell we ain't. If BP had to drill to the bottom of the ocean, if BP had to drill to the very bottom of the ocean to get oil and it end up blowing up in their face, that shows that the low-hanging fruit is in the process of dying, of running out.
Not in your lifetime.
Oh, yeah? Well, let's see now. Back 15 years ago, what was oil? Between 10 or 15 bucks a barrel. Now it's what, 80-something? Yeah, and then how about if 10 or so years from now, instead of being 80-something, it's 500-something? How about them apples?
That's crap.
Well, scarcity makes a world of difference, buddy. Oh, it sure does. If there's no oil, nothing's going to run. The minister for the boss of the French oil company was asked how many decades it's going to be for us to use the last drop of oil. And he said, oh, a few decades or so. A few decades or so for us to run out of the last drop. Well, I tell you, folks, long before we use up the last drop of oil, the price of oil will be out of the range of everybody in this park. That's how it's going to go. Only the Bill Gateses of the world will be able to afford to continue to put gas in their SUVs. All right? Because the BPs of the world,
every like that for 100 years, it hasn't happened.
Back in their face when they drill down to the bottom of the ocean or the bottom of the sea. And oh, by the way, that BP incident, it turns out, in the Gulf was not the first that they'd ever run into. A few years before, it turns out, according to Greg Palast, they had run into a similar thing in, if I remember right, the area of the Caspian Sea of Azerbaijan. But they managed to put the screws on that government to get that government to hush it up. And that's how it goes in nowadays. We've got a media which is asleep, and so most of the media lets these outfits put the screws on everybody who knows what's really going on, and so the Greg Palasts of the world have to sneak across the pond over to a place like Britain where they can actually get away with telling something approaching the truth. But here, it's all about hear no evil, see no evil, and it's analogous, at best it's analogous to the story of the blind men and the elephant, where the one blind guy feels a trunk, and the other blind guy feels a leg, and so on, and none of them understand that it's an elephant. That's at best. That's assume that the media can actually at least tell us what happened, and a lot of times they can't even do that. But it's not only the media, it's all of the elites of the country. Whether it's the preachers, the reporters, the business leaders, the union leaders, it doesn't matter. They all play the game. They all want to pretend that business as usual can continue forever. And they all want to spend money like it's going out of style. The human race for the past 30, they've got a chance, but not, as I understand it, they ain't consistent enough. And it takes too damn much oil to build the gizmos that use and send the stuff to us. As I understand, the better chance involves the hope for certain kind of technological breakthroughs involving stuff like hydrogen. My buddy Frank could give you a talk about that sort of thing. But as I understand it from Frank, it's going to take 10 years at least to get that stuff online, if we get it online at all. You've got folks busting their asses trying to figure out this stuff. But so far, no cigar.
What about thorium?
That's a complicated subject. There was a speaker at the College of Complexes a couple weeks ago about it. And in principle, it may be workable. I don't know the technical details enough. The guy made an impressive line of argument at the college a few weeks ago. We'll see whether the capital exists to make the things and make them safe and make them and then hook them into the grid. And granted, in principle, that's a possibility, I suppose. But I'm gonna hold off on judgment of that as to whether that has, whether that's actually gonna happen and be kept happening. I just don't know. And if someone here knows, I'd like to hear about it from them. All right, this. Well, okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay, fine. And yeah. It matters. All right, fine. The trouble is, well, let's put it this way, that this technology that you're talking about was built with oil. The human race over the past 100 years, roughly, threw the biggest party in human history. Especially, well, it's going to take oil to build that electric car. Everything that's trying to be done in this economy uses oil, and the price of that oil keeps on going up in fits and starts. Well, that depends. Well, I tell you, what I've seen out of the elites in this country in the past decade or so is so brutal. I don't have faith in them to do much of nothing except continue to line their pockets at public expense and cover up what they did and cover up their criminality. That's what they do. They did it up at Wall Street, up one side and down the other. There's all sorts of shit going on in nuke plants that are covered up. You can start with Fukushima. Let's talk about Fukushima for a minute. In the decades after Uncle Sam went over and took Japan and strung Tojo up, very few mice stirred in Japan. And so they called this outfit over there TEPCO. They went and they wanted to build a nuke plant on a GE design, and they built it within 50 miles or so of where, just late in the prior century, a typhoon had showed up, a wave had showed up, not 10 meters high, as was the case last year, but 38 meters high. So it was known that this part of the world could produce waves massively higher than a wave which, if it showed up, in this case it was 10 meters, managed to clock the joint. All right, they knew this, they didn't care. Whatever actuarial work they did got rigged. Yes, sir. That's it.
Is 15 minutes up? Does anyone else have anything they want to talk about?